to see you. What a performance.
What an intro, man. Thank you, man.
And I really mean that, man. You are one of the best to ever do it. Wow. And you're only 30 years old, which is absolutely incredible. 4 Oscar nominations. I want to talk to you about something that I really picked up on the third viewing of the film. There's this line that he says throughout to certain characters, I love you. He says it to Wally, he says it to his uncle, and then eventually at the end he finally says it to Rachel. And that line almost has an arc with him. And I think that's a really interesting thing, so he'll use it in scenes where it's maybe an intense argument, and then he'll say, I love you at the end. Can you speak about what that line kind of meant to you as an actor and kind of how that kind of showed you his arc?
I love how you pinpointed that. No one's asked me about that before, and it was very specific with Josh. You know, the first time sort of in jest, and is a contrasting moment to this argument with his uncle. But the last moment, I love you point that out. We shot versions with an I love you, and we also shot versions without an I love you. And Josh wanted to sort of modulate it later. In addition, you know, walking down the hallway at the end in the maternity ward, we had versions where I said, I'm the father, and we had versions where he didn't say, I'm the father. It was like little minutiae that you wouldn't necessarily notice, but and also I always love that because, you know, the Safdie special with Adam Sandler called Love You, that feels like a very Adam Sandler move, you know, to constantly be saying to people, you know, I love you.
Yeah, and it is honestly like it's him accepting almost responsibility, and that ending scene is incredible. And I know Josh has spoken about the idea it's the boy to a man, essentially, and he's accepting responsibility. And I remember it's interesting. You and I spoke at Little Women. I remember talking to you about this exact theme because that movie deals with as well that idea of losing your childhood and kind of becoming an adult. And I remember asking you at that interview, do you remember the moment in your own life when you felt your childhood slip away and you became an adult? And you said something so profound. You said something about the idea of like we all have this moment when we realize our parents don't really have it together. They don't really have it figured out. Meaning that we love our parents, but not everybody. We don't have everything figured out. Even our parents don't, and that's kind of a scary thing because you think your parents know it all growing up. Can you speak about that theme and kind of that's kind of come up in a few of your films, but also that idea of accepting responsibility as an adult?
I love comparing that with Little Women. I never made that connection in my head, but they really are similar endings for the character. You know, Josh said it beautifully in one of the Q&As we did that, you know, sometimes you see pictures of your parents growing up and it's pictures of your parents before they ever had you, and you think to yourself, who were these people? You know, like, I never met these people. And I think that's sort of, you know, I want to leave the interpretation you guys in that last moment, but I kind of feel like that's some of the emotion Marty's feeling is like, oh, this is a new life now. Now the image his child will see of him playing table tennis or playing in Japan or at the, you know, in the beginning, that's going to be a different Marty.
You know, interestingly, animals are something I find interesting that speak about who a character can be. You can learn a lot about a character through how they treat an animal. And Moses is obviously the dog is a huge part of this story. And I found myself when the bathtub scene happened, I wasn't worried about the guy's arm, I was worried about the dog getting out. And then when the dog flies out of the car, oh, thank God Josh cut to him running later on to make sure that Moses was okay. What is it about animals that gives such an insight into people, and like what does an animal give you as an actor in terms of vulnerability and kind of how people treat animals?
What a great question, man. I mean, well, they always say never follow children or animals, like when you're on stage or something, because they're so honest and there's no element of performance. You know, Josh has a real infatuation with animals in film. You know, we got to do this W Magazine thing that came out today with a rabbit, but the first thing I was ever going to do with Josh was sort of this short film, this fashion thing that got scrapped that was all around like a person's affection for their rabbit, and even on set, I think Josh has this affection for outsiders and non-performative bullshit. You know, is the best way I could put it, and you get that from an animal. You know, it's all raw id. I don't know how sophisticated, you know, I could talk about it beyond that. He just has a real infatuation for it, and as it relates to Marty, yeah, I think it shows he has a warmness, you know, in him, and there's a little bit of that in Josh. I don't know, like you see Josh around, you know, an animal or his kids, and he's an incredibly warm person, you know, and I don't know if plot-wise in the film, I don't know if Josh has spoken to it, maybe I shouldn't say it, but there was a whole Moses arc at the end. We even shot stuff where Marty was sort of taking him on. It was easy to cut around, so it's not in the movie. But there was a scene where he drops Moses off at his mom's and says, "Hey, take care of the dog while I go to Japan." You know, and then I think at that point in the movie we realized we had to, or Josh realized we had to get to Japan, but he had that affection baked in. You know.
Mm. You know, I was looking through your filmography. In a digital age that we live in now, you've been working in films that have been shot on film for a long time. Interstellar. I mean, I have a stay tattoo on my arm. I mean, I was at that Interstellar Q&A you did with Christopher Nolan, which was incredible. But like, you think about these filmmakers. Darius shot film here. Linus is shooting film on Dune 3, which is incredible. There's a high stakes and preciousness to film. I have to imagine as an actor. I mean, the first two Dunes were shot digitally with Greg Fraser, but like, is there anything about like the film shooting on film that adds a certain pressure to your performance and how precious you want to be with each take?
I love these questions, man. Absolutely, because I really, without being hyperbolic, I treat what I'm doing as like sacred. You know, the camera rolling is sacred. You know, and beginning with a complete unknown, and then also shifting into this. You know, projects that weren't these studio films like Wonka or Dune. I felt like every moment had to live on screen. And certainly when you're shooting on film, there's reload time, and I like the ceremony. I like the boundaries of it, and uh, I don't know how else to put it. I can imagine when musicians were making music in the '70s too, or when things were more analog, it could be more precious. You know, there's a real advantage if you're shooting on digital, wherever you can go back and grab something. But on film, it's romantic to me. I don't know how else to put it. And obviously, it looks great, but it demarcates very clearly. Now you're on, now you're off, and I really love that. You know.
Check the gate. You
Yeah.
know, and you've been scored by some of the greatest composers of all time: Hans Zimmer, Interstellar, Dune. Daniel's score here is remarkable. It's a character in the movie. As actors, generally speaking, you don't have that score on set. I know some filmmakers do, but in terms of what's your emotional relationship when you see yourself set to music? And like, does it reveal anything about the performance you've done that day? What the score kind of adds to that scene for you?
Increasingly, and I think shooting Dune this past summer, having the two scores to refer to while I was working was, an advantage I didn't have in the first movie because I didn't know what movie I was in, and now I knew what movie I was in. And here, uh, it was more soundtrack. It was more, there was like a 3-hour '80s playlist that Josh gave me, but it already imbued the experience of making this with this sort of like radical maverick spirit or something. Because it's like someone said to me, like Ben Affleck said to me, in '50s movies set to '80s music that should have died on his face. That should have immediately not worked. And I just got a sense of what Josh was doing. And I love seeing, you know, I love like making movies can be such a technical process. Acting can be such a technical process. 12-hour days. It's hyper organized. There's line producers. There's trailers. There's moving parts. And then all of a sudden, a composer will come in and he has this mystical process. I'm fascinated by it. I love the idea of Christopher Nolan talking to Hans Zimmer, and basically saying, not help, but this is what I'm going for, emotively, and it's a mystical process to me, man, and it's an unbelievable skill to be able to do it.
There's a beautiful magic to the way like Marty carries himself and the way the music kind of lifts him up a bit. There's a physicality to the way you carry yourself. When I first saw this movie, and first of all, I don't ever see you on screen. I always see your characters, and that's really interesting because like I think you really do become these people. But the way he walks, the way his chin is up, like there's this physicality to that. Can you speak about your way in and how the physicality informs the emotional?
The really pretentious answer would be like, there was, you know, within the athletic sequences, because it was table tennis, because as Ronnie the writer says, ping pong sounds humiliating or something. I like the idea that Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali or these guys, or Jordan or Kobe, these guys that swagger. I like because it didn't make any sense with table tennis to me, and I like the idea that to Marty it was a boxing match. And otherwise in the way. Just in the day-to-day stuff, it was like Baryshnikov or Balanchine or a guy that moved very elegantly. So that's like the very pretentious answer. On a really elemental level, we did the first take of the movie, and Josh came over to me, and he said, more audacity, more swagger. He said, more audacity, and it was music to my ears because I've been working in these movies for a while, and no one's ever said to me, more audacity, more swagger, and I was thrilled by that, I don't know why, but it just felt like such a unique note to hit, and I don't know how else to speak to that physicality.
Do you have so I remember Denzel Washington spoke about this once where you put a character's shoes on and he found the character through that. And obviously that can affect the way you walk, of course. Do you have an anchor that's your way in, like that's been consistent throughout the characters? I know they're all different people, but do you have like a certain thing you latch onto each time that goes, all right, this is my going to be my way in, or help me find this person?
No, I think the only thing that's been consistent is the inconsistency in which I find like a moment or a moment on set or a piece of article of clothing or a line. And here was a little bit of everything, you know. I think on Dylan, on Complete Unknown, it was like the songs were like anchors. And once I started to do those, I felt like very um, locked in, for like a better expression. Here, I don't really know what it was, you know. Yeah, maybe like the Miyako Belisi, the amazing costume designer, she said something to me that in this period, it was something like the more fabric young men had in their pants, the more they were flexing, quote unquote. You know, like the more like money they had, the more they were showing off. So that was sort of something like that was even fascinating to me, and feeling the looseness of the clothes and um, no, I don't know. You know, the glasses here. At risk of repeating myself, you know, Josh wanted my eyes to be tiny on screen, so I'm wearing contacts to offset my vision so I can then put lenses on to correct the vision, which really made me feel like I was in a fishbowl. But I liked it because Josh said he wanted to feel like the character was living this life of impairment, not as an aesthetic, but he wanted me to have that lived experience, and I liked it because then any sort of vanity with Marty, or there's a scene in the hotel room where the janitor's kind of getting the necklace from the drain and kind of checking the hair in the mirror. I love that. I know so many kids in New York. I don't know how many people are from New York here. I know so many. There we go. Nice. I know so many people from New York. I consider myself one of them. Like where your personality is your sleeve. That's your armor. That's all you have. You know, like you don't have real estate. You don't have nice clothes. You have personality, and I just so related to that, especially by way of athleticism or sports. You know, I never had the gift. I wanted the gift to be an athlete growing up. I never had it, but I did have dyed hair while I was playing. You know what I mean? Like I did have whatever I could find to express myself. You know.
I genuinely feel out of breath when I'm watching the ping pong scenes because there's a physical force to them. The grunts that you're doing in those scenes, do you have to ADR any of those? Like is that because is it all happening within the moment?
Yeah, that might have been an excess of reality. Like I don't know how realistic that was, but I like the idea. That was like John McEnroe or something at these tennis matches where, and it was funny to it's like a little paddle on a little ball, but you're treating it like it's like a mountain ranger moving or something. And I love McEnroe. I don't talk about him enough, man. Like I love him as a reference. And it's because you'd watch like McEnroe at Wimbledon in the 1980s, and he's such a brat, and an American individualistic and maverick in that spirit, especially when you go overseas as an American. And so I love that scene with the IATT commissioner in the beginning, and where he's, well, why is my hotel room so whack? It should be a nicer hotel. I'm good for table tennis. So
When we spoke for a complete unknown, you talked about I asked you about how you say goodbye to a character that you play because you spend years and years with these people, 6 years with with playing. I mean, it's unbelievable the process, and you're making other movies at the time. But the goodbye, we say goodbye to Marty at the end of the movie as he's crying with the baby. That's our goodbye to him. What is like how? What is your goodbye with your characters, and how has that changed over the years and letting them go? Because you move on to the next role, but I imagine they stay with you in some capacity. Does the goodbye change each time?
man, another great question, man. I mean, like, I don't know, a complete unknown, like you said, I felt like I was grieving or something. The second I ended, I felt really like I'd gone through something. And here I felt, we had the sequence you see in Japan was after the main shoot. Sorry for the technical answer, it's just the truth. And so, yeah. So I didn't feel like it was a clear ending. And I felt like so much of the spirit of Marty I've carried through. I'll never get to be Bob Dylan in front of a lot of people unless I'm living in some sycophantic universe where people are, pretending like I'm Bob Dylan. But here I could carry this through, and I have, and I'm grateful for it because Josh pushed me outside the box. But equally, when it was done, and not to say I wasn't melancholic, but I was fiercely proud. I felt when I finished Beautiful Boy in 2018, 2019, I felt the exact same way. I felt like, wow, I'm very proud to finish that, but it was demanding, as you said, so um, that's what I'm increasingly proud of, without rambling, but as an actor, is like the technical exercise of, a 12-hour day. And I was just listening to Zach Lowe's basketball podcast, how like it was comparing this. All right, we're gonna go on a tangent here for a second, but like somehow the Detroit Pistons and the San Antonio Spurs, these two basketball favorites this year, they've only been um, Detroit's been in one first round, and San Antonio's never been in the playoffs, and how hard it is to get to the championship when you've never experienced that. And I was listening and I loved it because I felt like that about making this and A Complete Unknown based on the experience I had in my early 20s, mid 20s, and how challenging it is to make a movie. It's so hard to stay locked in the whole time. It's 12-hour days, and your confidence goes up and down, or you know, there might be social consternation, whatever. And now I've had those experiences under my belt, so I feel like this and A Complete Unknown are the product of, you know, just getting a real process under my belt. I don't know how to put it. A real working process, the diligence, the discipline to see it over the finish line.
This is I went to the Interstellar Q&A you did with Christopher Nolan, and one of the things that didn't come up that I really wanted to ask you about was the cornfield chase sequence. And Timmy has that great line where you say, like, "What about the flat tire?" It's an amazing sequence, but that scene is incredible. And I was wondering if you could just do you have any memories? Because basically Timmy did this amazing Q&A with Christopher Nolan a couple weeks ago at Universal City Walk. We saw Interstellar in IMAX 70mm, which is an absolute masterpiece. But that was something I've always wanted to ask you about, was filming that sequence.
I'd love to talk about that. I mean, I love because they screen Interstellar is my favorite movie in 70mm at Universal City, and I got caught talking to Christopher Nolan outside, who to me is the greatest, one of the greatest, if not the greatest living film. And I felt like I couldn't go back inside, like soak up your time with Christopher, and be in front of him. And but then the movie was like it was an hour in, so I didn't get the chance to go back and see it. But that cornfield chase sequence, it was a dream, it was a dream to see Matthew work, it was a dream to see him work in conjunction with Christopher. It was amazing to see the production so tightly put together. We shot in that cornfield, then we moved to a location that was on the edge of a dam, actually, like an artificially.
Where you almost drive off,
yeah. And that was an actual cornfield he planted, so it was insane. It was so inspiring. I mean, when you're young and like you don't have your career going yet, or all you need is like a little bit of that was the elixir. That was a little bit of fuel that lasted me like 3 years or something. Like based on those 10 days, I can, I don't know how else to put it. You have a sense when you're young that these rooms where things are happening, where like creativity is happening, and you're not in those rooms, and then you have like a glimpse for a second, because I would be in the car with McConaughey between takes and I hear them, speaking about actors they had worked with and Chris's experience, man. I'm pretending I'm not listening, but I'm, kind of like this the whole time. And it was just, it was the fuel for the next 3 years.
Incredible. Well, I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. Thank you to Timothy for being here. You guys, remarkable film, and congratulations to you, man.